What would you do if the man who promised to protect you, to cherish you, decided to publicly execute your life in front of everyone you knew? What if he chose to do it while you were carrying his children at your most vulnerable? He thought I was just a pregnant, emotional wife he could discard like last season's fashion. He was about to find out how wrong he was. In the story I'm about to tell you, my husband planned to announce our divorce at our 10th anniversary party. A grand, public humiliation. But he had no idea that while he was planning his speech, I was planning a war. He would soon learn that I had already sold his company out from under him, drained his secret accounts, and bought the very building we were standing in. Stay with me, because what happened next will shock you. This is not a story of a woman scorned. It is the story of a queen taking back her kingdom. If you believe that betrayal should have consequences, that the arrogant should fall, then you are in the right place. But let me back up. Let me take you to the moment the first crack appeared in the perfect facade of my life. It began with a whisper of something wrong, a scent in the air that didn't belong. Our life was a carefully curated masterpiece of wealth and influence. Julian, my husband, was the architect of a tech empire, a man whose charisma was as vast as his fortune. And I was his wife, the serene hostess, the future mother of his twin sons, my body swollen and heavy at 8 months pregnant. Our penthouse overlooked the city, a glass palace where we were king and queen. He had just returned from a supposed 2-day business trip to Geneva. A whirlwind of meetings, he'd said, to close a deal that would make them titans. He kissed me, his lips cool, his eyes distant. He smelled of expensive scotch and the crisp, sterile air of a private jet. He dropped his briefcase by the door, the soft thud echoing in the cavernous living room. I moved to pick it up for him, a gesture of domesticity I had performed 1,000 times. He waved me away, a casual, dismissive flick of his hand. "Don't, Ilara. You shouldn't be lifting anything in your condition." His voice was smooth, laced with that practiced concern that once made my heart flutter. Now, it felt like a line from a script. He had been reciting it for months. My condition. As if pregnancy were an ailment, a temporary inconvenience that made me fragile and, in his eyes, perhaps a little dim. Later that evening, as our housekeeper, Maria, was unpacking his things, she called me into the master suite. Her face was carefully neutral, but her eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't place. Pity, warning. "Ma'am, I found this on the floor of Mr. Julian's travel bag." She held out her palm. Nestled in the center was a single earring. It was a teardrop diamond, small but exquisitely cut, suspended from a delicate platinum hook. It glittered under the soft lights of the closet, a tiny, malevolent star. I had never seen it before in my life. It was not mine. My jewelry was classic, understated. Pearls. Simple gold chains. This was something different. It was sharp, modern, aggressively glamorous. It belonged to another woman. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, settled in my stomach. A stark contrast to the fluttering life of my unborn sons. I took the earring from Maria's hand. The metal was cold against my skin. "Thank you, Maria. It must have gotten mixed up at the hotel laundry." The lie felt clumsy on my tongue, but she simply nodded and retreated, leaving me alone with the damning piece of evidence. I stood there for a long time, the diamond pressing a sharp point into my palm. The whole trip was a lie. The meetings, the deal, all of it. A man like Julian, a man who curated every detail of his life, did not make careless mistakes. This wasn't lost. It was discarded. He was wrong. So very wrong. I didn't confront him. What would have been the point? he would have woven a tapestry of lies so intricate, so plausible, that I would have ended up apologizing for my own suspicion. He was a master of that art. He could make you doubt the very ground beneath your feet. No. Confrontation was for amateurs. I needed certainty. I needed truth, cold and hard and irrefutable. That night I waited. I lay in our bed, my body a landscape of new and unfamiliar terrain, and feigned sleep. I listened to the rhythm of his breathing, the soft, even breaths of a man with no conscience. When he was deeply asleep, I slipped out of bed. The house was silent, a mausoleum of our shared life. The city lights painted shifting patterns on the marble floors. I went to his office, a sanctuary of leather and mahogany where he built his empire. His laptop sat on the polished desk, asleep but not off. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and resolve. I lifted the screen. The login prompt appeared, asking for a password. For a sickening moment, I thought I was defeated. He was meticulous about security, but his arrogance was his greatest weakness. I typed in the date of our first anniversary, 1026, October 26th, a date he had long since forgotten to celebrate with any genuine warmth, but one he had used for years as a default code. The screen flickered and opened to his desktop. I was in. My hands trembled as I navigated the files. It was a digital map of his betrayal. I started with his emails. A folder, innocently labeled Strategic Acquisitions, held the truth. It wasn't about business deals. It was about her. Her name was Serena. She was his new vice president, a woman whose corporate photos showed sharp features and an even sharper ambition. The emails were a timeline of their affair, intimate dinners in cities he was supposedly visiting for work, hotel confirmations, scanned receipts for gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, a lease agreement for a luxury apartment downtown. Then I found the photos, hidden in a cloud drive synced to the laptop, photos of them together. On a yacht in Monaco, his arms slung around her bare waist, laughing in a cafe in Paris, a trip he told me was a grueling solo marathon of investor meetings. In every picture, she wore a triumphant, possessive smile. She was the victor. I was the fool. The pain was a physical thing. It wasn't a sharp stab, but a deep, crushing weight that settled on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The babies kicked inside me, oblivious to the shattering of their world. I placed a hand on my belly, a primal protective gesture. This was no longer just about me. It was about them. Tears streamed down my face, silent and hot. I let them fall for a few minutes, a baptism of grief in the blue glow of the screen. I mourned the man I thought I married. I mourned the life I thought we had. I mourned the naive girl who believed in his perfect lies. Then something shifted. The grief receded, and in its place, a chilling calm began to spread through my veins. The tears stopped. My hand on the mouse became steady. The emotional storm passed, leaving behind an arctic stillness. My heart, which had been breaking, was now freezing over, hardening into something solid and sharp. This was not the end of my world. It was the beginning of his. He saw me as a fragile vessel, a domestic accessory. He thought my pregnancy had softened my mind, made me docile and compliant. He had forgotten who I was before I became his wife. He had forgotten the woman with a degree in finance from Wharton, the one who had run her own successful investment boutique before we married, a business I sold at his urging to focus on our family. He had made a catastrophic miscalculation. I didn't just read the emails, I documented them. I used my phone to take crystal clear pictures of every incriminating message, every photo, every financial statement. I forwarded the most damning evidence to a new encrypted email address I created on the spot. I worked silently, methodically, for hours. My mind, which had been clouded by love and trust, was now terrifyingly clear. I was no longer a wife. I was a strategist. The final discovery was the one that sealed his fate. It was a document draft from his personal lawyer, a prenuptial agreement, not for me, for Serena. Attached was a calendar invite on his personal calendar, set for the night of our 10th anniversary party. The subject line was simple: the future. He was going to propose to her at our party, after publicly divorcing me. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it stole the air from my lungs. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a spectacle. He wanted to destroy me, to humiliate me in front of our friends, our family, our entire social circle. He wanted to erase me and install his replacement in one grand dramatic gesture. That was the moment the last flicker of love for him died. It was the moment Ilara, the wife, ceased to exist. In her place stood someone else, someone cold and calculating, and utterly without mercy. I closed the laptop, my movements precise and silent. I wiped the keyboard and mouse with the hem of my silk robe, leaving no trace. I slipped back into bed, curling my body around the precious lives inside me. Julian slept on, oblivious. He was dreaming of his triumph. I was wide awake, planning a war. The next morning, at my lowest point, I made the most important call of my life. I didn't call my mother or my sister. I didn't call a friend to cry on their shoulder. I called Cassandra. Cassandra Hale was not just my oldest friend. She was the most feared divorce attorney in the state. We had grown up together, two sides of the same coin. While I had chosen a path of quiet partnership, she had chosen to become a warrior, wielding the law like a weapon. Her reputation was legendary. She didn't just win cases, she annihilated opponents. I met her at a discreet coffee shop far from our usual neighborhood. I looked pale and exhausted. She took one look at my face and waved the waitress away before I even sat down. "It's Julian," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. I pushed my phone across the table. It was open to the gallery of evidence I had gathered, the photos, the emails, the draft of the prenup. She scrolled through them, her expression transitioning from concern to a cold professional fury. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the phone. When she looked up, her eyes were like chips of ice. "The arrogant fool," she whispered. "He's not just cheating Ilara. He's committing financial fraud. He's been siphoning marital assets into shell corporations for years. This apartment lease for her, paid for by a company you jointly own." She slid the phone back to me. "Okay, the crying is over. The time for being a victim is over. Right now, you are no longer a wife. You are a client, and I am your lawyer. We are not going to let him divorce you. We are going to financially and socially obliterate him. Are you ready?" A fire ignited in my chest, burning away the last vestiges of sorrow. "Yes," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. "I want to leave him with nothing but the expensive suit on his back." Cassandra smiled, a chilling, predatory smile. "That's my girl. We can do better than that. We'll take the suit too." The next 2 weeks were a blur of clandestine activity. Cassandra's office became our war room. She assembled a team with ruthless efficiency. A forensic accountant named Marcus, who could find a hidden dollar on the moon, and a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Ari, whose skills were the stuff of urban legend. Our first meeting was in a sterile conference room with a sweeping view of the city. a view that included the top floors of Julian's office building. It felt symbolic. Marcus, a small man with eyes that missed nothing, projected a complex web of financial charts onto a screen. "Mr. Julian has been very busy," he said dryly. "He's established at least 4 shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He's been funneling money from your joint accounts and from his company's revenue into them. He's preparing to shield his assets for the divorce he's planning. He thinks he's clever." "Is he?" I asked. "He's sloppy," Marcus scoffed. "He used the same incorporation lawyer for all 4 entities. He used his mother's maiden name as a keyword in the passwords. It's amateur hour. I'll have access to every cent by the end of the week." Ari, who had been silent until now, spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "He and the mistress, Serena, are not discreet. They dine at the same restaurants. They vacation at the same resorts. He bought her a car. He's paying for her apartment. We have photos. We have video. We have receipts. Legally speaking, we have him by the throat." Cassandra leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "This is our strategy," she began, her voice low and intense. "Phase 1, asset control. Elara, you have a significant inheritance from your grandmother, held in a trust that predates your marriage. Julian knows about it, but he thinks it's a modest sum. He has no idea it's grown into a fortune. We will use that as our war chest. It is untouchable by him." I nodded. My grandmother had been a shrewd investor. Julian had always been dismissive of her little hobby. Another fatal underestimation. "Phase 2, documentation," she continued. "Ari and Marcus will finalize their reports. Every affair, every dollar he stole. We will build a case so airtight that he will have no choice but to surrender or face federal charges for fraud." "Phase 3, financial warfare," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Marcus will gain control of the offshore accounts. We will not touch them yet. We wait." We also discovered something interesting about Julian's company. His controlling shares are not in his name. They are held in a blind trust for the benefit of his family. You, Elara, and your unborn children. He set it up years ago as a tax dodge, never imagining his docile wife would ever look at the paperwork. My mind reeled. I was the majority shareholder of his entire empire. He gave me the power of attorney over that trust 6 months ago, I remembered aloud. He said it was for a portfolio restructure. He told me to just sign the papers. Cassandra's smile widened. "I know. I reviewed them. He gave you the keys to his kingdom, and he doesn't even know it." "And phase 4? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Phase 4, Cassandra said, is the strike. We execute on the night of your anniversary party. The very night he plans to humiliate you. We will detonate his entire world. We will transfer the money. We will sell his company shares to his biggest rival, who I've already had a very productive off-the-record conversation with. We will file for divorce on the grounds of adultery and fraud, and you, my dear, will walk away with everything." The plan was audacious. It was brutal. It was perfect. In the days leading up to the party, I played my part flawlessly. I was the loving, slightly overwhelmed, expectant mother. I discussed menu options with the caterers. I finalized the guest list. I even went with Julian to a final fitting for his custom tuxedo, telling him how handsome he looked. He lapped it up, his ego preening. He was so consumed by his own grand design that he couldn't see the abyss opening up beneath him. He saw my fatigue and mistook it for weakness. He saw my quiet moments and mistook them for sadness. He had no idea I was a general on the eve of battle, calm and focused, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The night of the party arrived. A crisp autumn evening. The ballroom of the 5-star hotel was breathtaking. a sea of crystal chandeliers and white roses. Hundreds of guests, the city's elite, mingled and drank champagne. I wore a custom-made gown of deep emerald silk that draped elegantly over my swollen belly. I felt like a queen. Julian was in his element, gliding through the crowd, accepting congratulations, his arm possessively around my waist. His performance was flawless. He was the doting husband, the proud father-to-be, a man at the pinnacle of his life. I saw Serena across the room. She was holding a flute of champagne, looking smug and radiant in a crimson dress. She caught my eye and gave me a small, condescending smile, the smile of a woman who believes she has already won. I smiled back, a serene, placid smile that I knew would infuriate her. Let her have her moment. It would be her last. My phone vibrated silently in my small clutch. I slipped into a quiet alcove to read the messages. The first was from Cassandra. Asset transfer complete. The offshore funds are now in a secure account in your name. We're live. The second was from Marcus. Share sale executed. Thorsten Industries now owns a 51% stake in Julian's company. He is no longer CEO. He just doesn't know it yet. The third was from my real estate agent. Sale of the penthouse closed this afternoon. The new owners take possession tomorrow. The funds are in your account. I had sold our home using the power of attorney Julian had so carelessly given me. The final message made me pause. It was from the holding company that now managed my grandmother's trust. The acquisition of the St. Regis building is complete. Congratulations on your purchase. I now owned the hotel we were standing in. I took a deep breath. All the pieces were in place. I returned to the party, my composure absolute. Julian found me, his eyes shining with a feverish excitement. "It's time, darling," he said, squeezing my hand. "Time for the speeches." He led me to the front of the room, near the stage where a small orchestra was playing. He helped me into a chair, a picture of loving concern for the benefit of the audience. Then he stepped up to the microphone. A hush fell over the room. "Friends, family," he began, his voice resonant and confident. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate 10 years with me and my beautiful wife, Elara." He gestured to me, and polite applause filled the room. I smiled my serene, empty smile. 10 years is a long time," he continued, a note of faux solemnity in his voice. "A time for reflection, a time for growth, and sometimes a time for new beginnings." I could see Serena near the front, her eyes fixed on him, her entire body thrumming with anticipation. This was her coronation. "Elara and I have shared a wonderful journey," he said, his gaze sweeping over me, cold and clinical. "But all journeys must come to an end. To mark this new beginning for us both, I want to announce that Elara and I will be getting a divorce." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Whispers erupted. Friends looked at me with expressions of shock and pity. They saw a pregnant woman, publicly and cruelly discarded. Julian let the shock hang in the air for a moment, savoring it. He was a showman, and this was his masterpiece. He was about to turn to Serena, to complete his vile tableau, but he never got the chance. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I walked to the stage and took the second microphone from its stand. Julian looked at me, confused, then annoyed. This was not part of his script. "Thank you, Julian," I said, my voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the silent ballroom. "I agree. It is a time for new beginnings, and I'd like to thank you for this one." He tried to interrupt, but I spoke over him. "You see, while Julian was planning his grand announcement, I was doing a little planning of my own. At that exact moment, As if on cue, the main doors of the ballroom swung open. 2 large, impeccably dressed men walked in. They were not guests. They were my new head of security. They moved to flank the stage, their presence imposing and absolute. Julian stared at them, his confusion turning to alarm. Julian is right. Our marriage is over, I continued. My eyes locked on his. But he seems to be under a few misapprehensions about the terms of our separation. For instance, he seems to think he has a company to run. I turned to the crowd. As of 6 p.m. this evening, Julian's controlling shares in his company were sold. I believe the new CEO, Mr. Peterson from Thorsten Industries, is actually with us tonight. Would you care to stand, Mr. Peterson? A man in the back stood up and gave a slight nod. Julian's face went white. His jaw dropped. He also seems to think we have a home to divide, I went on, my voice gaining strength. But our penthouse was sold this afternoon. The new owners will be moving in tomorrow. I do hope you've packed a bag, Julian. Panic was now clear in his eyes. He looked wildly around the room, as if searching for an escape. He looked at Serena, whose triumphant smile had dissolved into a mask of horror. She was realizing she had hitched her wagon to a falling star. And finally, I said, letting the words land with precision, he seems to think his future is secure. But the millions he has spent years hiding in offshore accounts, money stolen from our family, was transferred into my sole possession about an hour ago. I paused, letting the weight of his total ruin settle upon him. You came here tonight to leave me with nothing, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. But you are the one who has nothing, Julian. Not a company, not a home, not a dollar to your name. Then, for the final brutal blow. Oh, and one more thing. As the new owner of this hotel, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. My security will escort you out. He stared at me, his face a grotesque mixture of disbelief and impotent rage. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was broken, utterly and completely. As my security team stepped forward to take his arms, another set of figures appeared at the ballroom doors. These men were not in tuxedos. They were in dark suits, with badges clipped to their belts. Federal agents. Cassandra stepped out from behind them, holding a file. She nodded at me. The lead agent approached the stage. Julian Carter, he said, his voice booming in the dead silence. You're under arrest for wire fraud and embezzlement. They cuffed him right there, in the middle of his own party, under the glittering chandeliers. The flash of cameras from guests' phones began to pop, capturing his ultimate humiliation for eternity. As they led him away, a pathetic, defeated figure, his eyes met mine one last time. They held no anger, only the hollow, vacant look of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had his wings melted away by a fire he never saw coming. I stood there on the stage, one hand resting on my belly, feeling the strong, steady kicks of my sons. I was not a victim. I was not a woman scorned. I was a founder of a new dynasty, built upon the ashes of a man who had forgotten that the person you think is your weakest piece can, in fact, be the queen.